old homes and you don't see many closets, it's because they couldn't afford the tax, most likely.
Right.
So they would, yes, they would keep their clothes in armoires and chests to avoid the closets that, or the presses that they called them, to avoid paying additional tax that they really could not afford.
Wow.
One closet has 4 doors on it, so Jesse's basically saying, I can take 4 doors.
And he could.
Oh, so it was, even though they wouldn't count that as one, they would count that as 4.
Every door.
Oh, wow.
Doesn't matter how many doors you put on the walls, they were doors, right? So that's how they charged it.
Wow.
This document box was one that Grant kept important documents in, perhaps, and also probably letters from his wife Julia. And this was carried from battlefield to battlefield, most likely by staff or other helpers during the Civil War. As you look around the table, you can see photos of the house at different stages in its life. But there was porches put on the house, but not while the Grants lived here. So it was restored back to no porches. The paint was removed and it's back to the brick that they would have known when they lived here. It became popular in the late 1880s to paint brick. So that made whoever was here at that time want to keep up with the trend and painted the house white. And we never saw the brick until about 2011 when the state removed it. And this is the building across the street that you see, which is the tannery. The people who lived there forever, raising 5 children, donated it to the state of Ohio. So the windows are boarded up right now because they're trying to restore the interior back to what was original and not the things added over the time that it started, since the newer years had passed. And this is a picture of the architect scraping the paint. Just took a chance one day thinking, well, the Grants had a lot more money than we ever thought. And he started scraping the paint off the doors, and the finish was so perfect because of all the coatings of linseed oil that Christine found out about that would seal that so hard that even the paint would come off easily when it was restored. The secretary, or which is what they call their desk, now we hire one, but this beautiful piece of furniture did not belong to the Grants, but we know they owned at least 40 books. Most families could barely afford a Bible, and many couldn't even read it. But Jesse learned to read at a young age and wanted his children all educated, as I mentioned to this couple. And he had over 40 books, and there was no library, so anyone who lived in the area could come and borrow books and read them and bring them back. The horse portrait there was actually in the State House in Columbus, Ohio for many, many years. And the horse's name is American Eclipse. And it was a racehorse that Christine told me I didn't even know. They didn't run tracks like our horse races today. They actually ran through the countrysides. And this horse ran 8 races, different races, and won every single one. So they decided not to risk the horse's future with any more races and let him go out to pasture and sire other very famous racehorses. But that was at a time when Ulysses S. Grant, being a horseman, and lots of people were, would have been very familiar with that horse and its standing in the horse race world. So they were not kind enough to loan it to us. The wood stove insert, you can see from the enlarged newspaper article out of Cincinnati paper, if you couldn't get what you needed in Georgetown, you go to Cincinnati. And they felt that Jesse Grant, being a successful businessman, would have likely purchased a wood stove because they became available in 1829, and this part of the house was finished in 1828, would have made heating this room a lot easier. So they think, well, the guy with all the money, he would keep up with modern technology. You probably have a phone just like that too. Would you like to talk about our beautiful pool?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, those shards of glassware and concrete you're looking at were found in the foundation when the kitchen was restored back in the original 1825 kitchen. So there's real pottery that a lot of people know the names of it, and I've not remembered it enough to tell you what they were, but bits and pieces.
So we're now standing in the foyer, the main entrance to the house. Likely the family continued to use the back entrance, which you all came in. But this would have certainly been the Sunday entrance when Grant's father, Jesse, was having people come over after church to sit in the parlor. He was big time on selling fire insurance. He built a brick house. I just believe in my mind that he was really conscious of the hazards of fire and wooden houses. He even built a brick outhouse that you'll get to see, which is kind of interesting because your typical wooden outhouse, you just pick it up with poles and move it when the hole fills out. The brick outhouse, you have to clean it out. But he had a brick outhouse that wasn't going to burn down. So the front door is the original front door that people would have walked in. We're standing on the precursor to linoleum. This is basically oilcloth painted in an 1820s pattern, just the way it was done. Now, just like the doors, the oilcloth was oilcloth with linseed oil. Then it was painted with oil paint, and this is like a faux marble look to it here. And then again, multiple layers of linseed oil on top of it, which dries really, really hard. And this is really sturdy stuff. Pretty neat stuff. This is a beaver hat that does date back 200 years. It was donated by the Simpson family, Hannah Simpson, Jesse's wife, Grant's mother. And the way that beaver hats were made in those days, top hats, you know, we always see Lincoln wearing one. Rarely do you see Grant wearing a top hat. I think maybe once or twice there's a photograph of him. But they made them by taking either beaver pelt or beaver felt. You would scrape the fur off the skin, would be the felt that would be made, or the pelt, and the process used mercury. They would, you know, mercury is kind of liquid anyway. You heat it up just a little bit and it turns basically into a watery substance. And the hatters would then drape the pelt or the felt over a wooden form with their bare hands. Well, we now know that mercury is highly toxic, and the poor hatters would, their teeth would fall out, their hair would fall out, they'd lose their eyesight, and they would literally go mad. That would destroy brain cells. So we have the Mad Hatter that Lewis Carroll wrote about, and Alice Through the Looking Glass, but it was a very, very true and very sad phenomenon that hatters suffered that way. In this room again, we have 3 doors. You know, Jesse is very glad to brag about the number of doors he could afford to have in his house. That one goes out onto the porch. This door here goes down to a large basement. I really hesitate to call it a cellar because I have to duck a little bit and I'm 6 feet tall, but underneath the beams it's probably about, it's pretty tall down there. But it's really neat that there's a fireplace in the cellar basement under that fireplace right there. Now, why would they have had a fireplace in their basement? Because Jesse was a really brilliant guy. Grant's father was a smart dude. He could light a fire during the winter and have radiant floor heat in the parlor where he would be entertaining people on Sundays. Wow. You'll also notice that the ceilings are tall. A lot of houses back in the early 1800s were built with low ceilings, and folks would think, well, if it's a low ceiling, then it'd be easier to heat it during the winter. Jesse thought the tall ceiling, the heat will rise and keep the lower part of the room cooler. So again, he thought when he built this house, tall ceilings, I want to do that. But then during the summer, the windows would be open, and that stench from the tannery would be wafting through the open windows. And we're literally 2 blocks from the courthouse. Courthouse windows would be open. It was a wooden courthouse back in the day, not the brick one that's there now. But again, judge holding court with the tannery stench just wafting through the windows. But judges didn't hold court every day. They were traveling judges that would come through periodically. So I think that, here, picture of Grant, taken by Thomas Brady.
Tom Brady. Yeah.
Tom Brady, yes. And this is
Matthew Brady.
Matthew Brady. This is a life-size image of President Grant, 3-star general at this point. And this was actually taken during the Overland Campaign after Grant had become Lieutenant General over all the Union armies. And he's wearing his tails. You can see this here. And no doubt Matthew Brady said, "Sir, please put on your tails so I can take your picture." And Grant did, but typically he ran around in just the infantryman's uniform with 3 stars pinned to his lapel. But you can see the dust. He's far from looking like far from looking fancy like General Lee generally always looked very dashing and proper, but Grant did not. So this was taken after the first day of Cold Harbor, and it was a brutal defeat for the Union. And Grant, being Bulldog Grant, said, we'll go get him tomorrow. And he did not. They lost again the second day terribly. And Grant wrote in his memoirs that that was really the worst day of his life, that his call to fight again a second day, 15,000 of his troops lost their lives. And he took that very, very personally. So when he was called the Butcher, people did die under his command. They would do whatever he asked them to do, his troops would. But he really took the deaths very, very hard. So that's him, just before he lost the worst day of his life. So with that, now we can go upstairs.
They were all losing lots, all the
Oh,
generals.
yeah, oh, yeah, yeah.
I heard recently at a talk that how many, 800,000 horses were
Oh, yeah.
killed
Yeah,
at Gettysburg.
yeah. Yeah, the horses just.
You know, horses were just equipment to me,
Right.
very important equipment. But about 800,000 horses were killed during that battle, and over 30,000 lives. And they all just were gathered up and burned, imagine that.
And you can wonder why there were so many horses that died, but it's because the wagon trains that pulled the army's supplies with them were all pulled by lots and lots of horses. Yeah. Okay, well, we can head
We just know
upstairs.
war is a terrible thing.
It is.
And
700,000.
somehow they continue to happen.
Yeah, I
So we
know.
just can pray and hope and,
How much is the floor for that? You think it's original?
all that's original. All this is wood under original. The only original floor that isn't original is the porch and the new kitchen that was, put back on its stone foundation in about 2000.
Or I heard you guys can switch in here.
For the stairway and all the entry and everything is the original floor. And think of all the ownership in a beautiful shape.
Yeah.
Absolutely beautiful. Railings the same way, all the woodwork on the windows and all.
Okay, I'll talk about this little room some.
Sure.
The master bedroom. This would have been Grant's bedroom. The firstborn son typically had their own bedroom, likely until, in Grant's situation, maybe his two sisters would have had this room when they were born, or perhaps he would have shared it with his younger brothers. But regardless, the firstborn son typically got the first room. Now, Grant wrote in his memoirs how he could look from his bed, prop his elbows up at his window, and look over to his school, which was about 5 blocks that way. Now there are trees grown up, but if we think of this as being farm fields, he could have seen across the fields to his one-room schoolhouse. Actually, it's a 2-room schoolhouse, but everybody was taught in one room. And it was built 2 rooms. The townspeople built it, and they built it with the foresight that perhaps the teacher would actually live there. It was a subscription school, which meant that the parents paid for the children to go to school there. Paid the teacher directly. It wasn't that they paid a government entity or board or something like that. They actually paid the teacher, and it was typically $2 per student to go to school. So Jesse and Hannah were paying for all their kids to go to school happily, and they would walk to and from school. During the winter, they would carry firewood to school with them to keep the schoolhouse warm, and they were very involved in taking care of the school. But even in this little room here, you can see how there's a press, there's a closet with 2 doors on it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, and this is the only room in the house without a fireplace.
Oh, so it would be cold too.
Yeah, so Hannah would likely be tucking her children into bed with a hot stone from the fireplace, wrap it up in blankets and tuck them into bed. Yep. And then this is the master bedroom.
This is the beautiful, largest room in the house, and no doubt when they were here, there could have been at least a couple more beds in this room to accommodate all the people that were living here periodically. The rocking chair next to you in the pretty skirt was the second rocking chair that Ulysses' father Jesse made for his wife Hannah. There's one downstairs as well. So we know that she had one made for her upstairs and down, which was very convenient. The cradle did belong to the Grant family, so we can assume that Ulysses and his siblings were rocked in that cradle. And the secretary is a beautiful piece and dates back to that time, but none of the other furniture belonged to them. But since Jesse was such a busy businessman and a very organized one, no doubt, he would have had his record keeping